Episode 58. Why don't employees take ownership? Great question. Why don't they? Say something goes wrong, it's the customer, not me. It's the market, management, another department, someone else. And if you're leading that person, it can be incredibly frustrating. But telling someone to take more ownership, just take more ownership, rarely fixes it, right? Because ownership isn't something you can demand. It's a way of thinking that changes the question from whose fault is this to what part of this can I influence? Once I understood that, and once I understood the difference, it completely changed how I coach performance. I'm Bryan. I've spent more than 30 years leading teams. I think my earliest lesson, my first lesson in ownership, came a lot earlier. And it dates back to a time when I was sleeping on the floor of a friend's house. I didn't have really anywhere to call my own, and I just landed my first job. At that point in my life, I wasn't thinking about leadership. I wasn't thinking about becoming a manager. I certainly wasn't thinking about where my career might take me. I see, I'd recently had a period without a home, and I just landed a job as a courier. My first real job. I needed it. And I'd long held a very simple motto. If it is to be, it is up to me. So that's how I approached the job. I turned up early. I made sure my vehicle was maintained. I kept my lunch with me, so I didn't need to disappear somewhere in the middle of the day. I planned my routes. I thought ahead. And when I got a delivery, I got on with it. Sometimes literally running the parcel from the vehicle to the customer. If somebody needed a hand, I'd help. If there was something useful I could do, even if it didn't earn me money, I'd do it. Nobody had given me a checklist saying, Bryan, this is how you take ownership. I simply believed that if I was responsible for getting those deliveries done on time and undamaged, then it was up to me to work out how to get them done. Pretty simple. That's ownership. But I also saw another approach. There were drivers who would goof off when they could have been making deliveries. They'd waste time, they would avoid the jobs they didn't like, and when their results weren't great, jobs not delivered on time, there was always a reason: traffic, the allocator's fault, customer's fault, the manager's fault, someone else's fault. And something struck me. Quite often, those same drivers were complaining about the money they weren't making, even though they were the drivers wasting opportunities to make it. Now, I'm not suggesting every poor result is one person's fault. That's far too simplistic. Sometimes traffic really is terrible, and sometimes a customer does hold you up. Sometimes management does make a bad decision. Sometimes the system itself is a little bit broken. There will always be things outside our control and our employees' control. But there's a very important difference between fault and ownership. Something doesn't have to be your fault, but you can still ask what you can do about it. And this is the tool that I want you to put in your toolbox today. Move things from fault to influence. When something goes wrong, don't begin with whose fault is this? Begin with what part of this can I influence? Get your employees and your team thinking that way. What part of this? Doesn't matter what's right, what's not ideal. What can I change? What can I influence? How can I make this better? That's a much more useful question, don't you think? And unknowingly, that's what I'd been doing as a courier. How can I make this better? What part of this can I influence? If my route wasn't efficient, route, what could I change? If I wasn't getting enough deliveries done, where was I losing time? If I didn't know something, who could I ask? I couldn't control everything, but I could control far more than I would have if I'd simply blamed someone else. And gradually, that behaviour got noticed. I moved from courier to allocator to operations management. Eventually, I had 20 owner-drivers reporting to me. And later on, that experience would help springboard me into a much larger operation with 4 allocators and more than 120 drivers. And eventually from there, I moved into sales and sales leadership. Different jobs, different industries, different measures, but I keep seeing the same pattern. The strongest performers don't have perfect circumstances. They aren't immune to bad luck. And they didn't have the easiest territories or the easiest customers. But when something went wrong, they tended to ask a different question. What can I do differently? How can I make it better? They planned, they prepared, they followed up, they asked for feedback, they learned, and they adjusted. Then they tried again. The people who struggle over long periods often had a different pattern. The result wasn't great, maybe. And the explanation was always somewhere outside themselves. And here's why that matters. If the problem is always outside yours or your employee's control, so is the solution. Think about that. If something is always somebody or something else's fault, then there's nothing you can do about it, right? There's nothing to improve. And you've accidentally, by thinking that way, given away your ability to change the outcome. So one of the ideas that I've come to believe very strongly is that ownership begins where excuses end. Not because you should blame yourself for everything. You shouldn't. Ownership isn't self-blame. Ownership is asking, what can I do next? What one thing can I do that's most likely to be beneficial? What's that one thing that I can do next to make things better for me or for others? So years later, when I started managing sales teams, this thought process of what can I do to make things better? What can I do to make things easier? That thought process became incredibly useful because sales gives you plenty of numbers: revenue, margin, new customers, number of calls, proposals, conversions. And when somebody's results are poor, you can start seeing patterns. You can see the result. But the result wasn't where I started. I worked backwards. What behaviours are creating the result? How many conversations are happening? Are my team talking to the right customers? How are they preparing? Are they following up? How are they responding to objections? Are they asking for feedback? Were they changing their approach when something wasn't working? Because I can't coach last month's result. It's already happened. But you can coach the behaviours that create next month's result. And that's a very important distinction. Remember, you can coach the behaviours that will deliver next month's result. So important. Results are the shadow of behaviour. If I want to change the shadow, I need to understand the behaviour that's creating it. And that's where I see many new managers struggle. Particularly if it's their first management role, they care about their people, they don't want to upset them, they don't want somebody walking away from a conversation feeling bad. So when performance is poor, they sometimes avoid talking about it. They wait, maybe next month will be better. Maybe the person would work out. Maybe things will turn around. Sometimes they do, but usually they don't. And eventually, the employee leaves. Then the business recruits somebody else. We train them. We wait for them to become productive. And we lose opportunities in the meantime and potentially repeat the whole cycle. I've found a different approach that works much better. Don't attack the person, but get curious about the behaviour. I sit down and I say things like, Let's work backwards. Here's the result. What created it? What are you doing that's working? What's not working? Where could we change something? And that's a very different conversation from you're not performing. One creates defensiveness. The other one, hopefully, creates curiosity. And curiosity gives you somewhere to go. Now, if you're getting value from these conversations, please consider subscribing. Every week, I'm adding another practical tool to that toolbox, using lessons from real workplaces and real experiences in leadership. And I also share more of this on LinkedIn. So if you're on that platform, it'd be great to connect there. Now, back into the podcast. There's another side to this performance conversation. Leaders can't complain that people aren't taking ownership when they create an environment where ownership is punished. And we've talked about this in previous episodes. If every mistake is met with blame, people become cautious. If every decision has to be approved, people learn to wait. And if every new idea gets shut down, guess what happens? People stop suggesting them. And then 6 months later, the leader comes along and says, why doesn't anyone show initiative? Well, what have we taught them? One of my core beliefs, again, is people respond to what you repeatedly reward, what you put out there. If you reward initiative, if you reward good judgment, learning, or honest reflection, people taking responsibility for what they can control, you get more of it. If you reward people for staying safe and never getting anything wrong, you'll probably get more of that too. You won't get much happening, but you'll get more of that. And that's why ownership has two sides. The individual has to be willing to own their own behavior. Remember, if it is to be, it is up to me. But the leadership has to create an environment where ownership is safe. And when those two things come together, performance changes very quickly, in a good way too. I can vouch for that. And this is why when someone in my team makes an honest mistake, I'm actually more interested in what happens next than the fact that the mistake happened. Did they own it? Did they tell me? Did they understand what happened? Did they learn from it? And what will they do differently next time? That's ownership, not perfection. I never expect perfection, but I want ownership. That distinction really matters, because high-performing teams are not teams where nobody makes mistakes. Believe me, we look at an elite tennis player, they might only win 51% of their matches, but be a world champion. Believe me, they make mistakes, but they are a high performer. High-performing teams are teams where people don't spend all their energy hiding them, hiding mistakes, blaming somebody else. They just learn from their mistakes, they adjust, and they move forward. And that's how capability grows. And it's how I learned to coach people. It took me a while, but it's how I eventually learned to coach people, and it's how I operate today. I don't coach the person, I coach the behaviors. And that's another tool worth keeping. Don't coach the person, coach the behaviors. Because when you separate the person from the behavior, you can have much better conversations. You're not saying you're no good at this. What you're saying is the behavior isn't producing the result we need. What could we change? And that's something to work with right there. So if you're leading someone who's struggling with ownership, don't just tell them you need to take more ownership. Help them see what it looks like. Work backwards from the outcome. Okay, here's where we got to. How did we get here? Identify the behaviors. Separate what they can't control from what they can. Okay, so you might not be the world's most capable presenter. I rank myself a 5 out of 10, by the way. But if you're not the world's most capable pitcher, then you can compensate for that by simply pitching more. You'll still get the result. You've just got to work a bit harder. So you separate what they can't control from what they can control, and then ask, what part of this can you influence? And let them answer. Don't solve it for them immediately. Let them think. Let them build that tool for themselves in a way that works for them. Because eventually, you want that question to become the one they ask themselves. What can I influence today to change my results? Now, today's tool, here it is again. It's very simple. Move from fault to influence. Something went wrong. Fine. What happened? What did we learn? What can we influence? What do we do next? That's ownership. Now, a time to reflect. This episode, the reflection is just as simple. The next time something doesn't go to plan, you ask yourself, what part of this can I own? Not what can I blame myself for? What can I own? Where is my influence in this? What behavior? What decision? What response? And more importantly, what happens next? Because even when you can't control what happened, you can control what you do next. And that's where ownership gives you something incredibly valuable. Agency, control, the ability to influence your own outcomes. What you do next. We can't control some situations, but what we can control is how we react to them. What you do next will influence your outcomes. And that lesson, remember, started for me as a young courier sleeping on a floor without a bed. I did not know where my career was going. I certainly didn't have anything figured out. But I had one belief, that one belief, if it is to be, it is up to me. And more than 30 years later, I still think there's a lot of truth in it. In the next episode, we're going to take that idea one step further. Because if you want people to take ownership, someone has to show them what ownership looks like. So what we're going to do is explore how to become a leader before you have the title, and why leadership often begins years before the promotion arrives. Until then, keep building your toolbox. This is The Long Way Forward.